Daniel 5. We're not going to have time to read every verse, but I'm going to put this stuff up here, and I'm going to do some summarizing for you, okay? And I love the history, so I'm going to share some stuff with you from history, and hopefully we got enough time to get through it. So we start the book of Daniel, and the first thing I did was I busted out and found the more famous photos of Daniel chapter 5 here, right? So this is the Feast of Belshazzar, and many ancient artists have used this as inspiration, right, for subject matter. This one's pretty famous. It's Rembrandt, so I'm sure you've heard of him, but it is an interesting one, and this is his rendition of that. This next one is actually from the Doré Bible, and it is by Gustave Doré. This one is an interesting one. You can see kind of up there in the corner, they've got the handwriting. He doesn't actually show the hand. This one's probably a bit more true to life because they believe that throne room where the kings of Babylon was a very big room with a niche in the back for the throne, and so this one's probably pretty true to archaeology. And then finally, I am so sorry that this one is not better, but this is a painting by John Martin, and he is famous for architecture and a host of other really cool things. You can see up here in that corner, that is actually where the hand is writing. And so again, this one speaks to that very large open area. But of course, the artist had to give you the view behind. So if you see this would have been the niche, and actually there's a wall there, but it's no big deal. He took some artistic license there. But nonetheless, some pretty cool stuff from history, and Daniel itself is full of very amazing imagery, and so you see a lot of artists who use that for inspiration. Okay, so let me run you through some history, okay? So Nebuchadnezzar, everybody remember him? He's the king, right, of Babylon. We've spent the last few weeks talking about him, studying about him, and the Lord was trying desperately to humble him. And had to really give him a spanking. So between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, we've got a few folks, okay? So there's three kings. There's actually Ner-iglassar. I'm sure I've totally nailed that Babylonian pronunciation. And that was actually, no, sorry, I messed that up. So after Nebuchadnezzar was Amel-Marduk, sometimes referred to as Evil Merodach. He briefly ruled. He was actually the son of Nebuchadnezzar, but he was murdered and replaced by Nergal-Assar, and that he was married to Nebuchadnezzar's daughter. So then that guy was deposed, and his son, Labashai-Marduk, briefly held the throne, and then he was deposed, and then the last king of Babylon was Nabonidus, according to the Persian histories. Now, we know, because we have the Bible, that actually the last, Daniel refers to Belshazzar, right, as the king. So, I don't know why, but a lot of historians insist on the Bible somehow is not historically accurate enough. And so when they don't have the extra biblical sources, then they get funny about that and they make up crazy stories. So you'll often hear Daniel referred to as a book that is not historical. In fact, there are some theories that it was written by somebody in the 2nd century. And it was intended to be an allegory. That's bunk. I'm just going to tell you straight away that is not how that goes. But there are some who believe that because of the lack of extra biblical sources. So from basically the time of around Jesus' time until about the 1900s, nobody knew about Belshazzar. There weren't any historical records. But are you surprised? They found some. And then now we all know about Belshazzar. So basically what happened with him is Nabonidus during this coup, right, they got rid of that last king, and Nabonidus became the king of Babylon. He was very fond of one of the Babylonian deities, Sin, which is kind of funny, I think. But nonetheless, Sin was actually the moon goddess. Marduk was the god that most Babylonians worshipped. And so Babylonians in general were not too fond of the fact that the Nabonidus was trying to make Sin the primary god in the Babylonian thing. So he actually ended up going north into Syria and spent most of his time there. And so he actually authorized Belshazzar, his son, to be basically co-regent, right? So he was second to him. But Nabonidus was very rarely at the capital. And we'll get into some other stuff here in a bit. So Belshazzar was actually kind of reigning. Now, that's going to figure prominently into the story here in a bit because he's going to offer, Belshazzar is going to offer to Daniel, right, to be third in line. So that is actually how he ends up with being able to offer him third. Okay, so this is complicated. I'm not going to go through a bunch of this, but this is the history and some a couple of things I want you to notice. So this is Nebuchadnezzar here, right? And then Nebuchadnezzar is actually married to an unnamed Egyptian woman, and then they have a child, and her name is Nitocris. They believe that Nabonidus married Nitocris, and then that was the mother of Belshazzar. Okay, they haven't validated that with history, so that's this part they've validated, but this part they haven't. So basically, the parentage of Nitocris is not historically, it's a guess, okay? But the whole like Nitocris and Nabonidus, that part's not. Okay, so we're going to start because I think reading some scripture is good. So we're going to start with some scripture. So King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and of silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Okay, so let's go back and talk for a second. Back in about 160 years before Hezekiah. Everybody remember the story of Hezekiah? He was one of the kings of Israel. So a lot of the kings of Israel, right, they start with, and they did evil in the sight of the Lord. Hezekiah, on the other hand, was one of the few who actually did not do evil in the sight of the Lord. So he was a pretty good king, and at the end of his life, the prophet Isaiah arrived to tell him, hey, put your affairs in order. The Lord has said it's time for you to come see him. And Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and cried and prayed to the Lord, and the Lord heard his prayer. So before Isaiah had left, the Lord told Isaiah, go back in there and tell him he's going to get 15 more years. So Hezekiah was like, yes, that's awesome. And during that 15 years, some folks from Babylon arrived. So this is pre-Nebuchadnezzar, right? 160 years in advance. And so what does he do? But he shows them everything in the place. All of it. All the stuff from Solomon's temple, the treasury. He that's a double negative. He shows them everything. We'll just say it like that. So the Babylonians, of course, are going to arrive, and it's not going to go well. And so because he shows them everything, God sends Isaiah back to Hezekiah and says, hey, this is not going to go well. And then the Lord says they will carry off everything, right? So captives and everything that you see. So that happens in Isaiah 39. Now, what did they build but the temple articles, right? So this is a smattering of things, but the candle stands, the wick snuffers, or wick lamp lighters, there's a whole bunch of stuff. So all of these are typically made of some of the smaller things of gold, some of the larger things of bronze, plated with gold. So this was an impressive treasury full of stuff. But remember, this is all very, very holy stuff, right? So God had literally given the craftsmen the knowledge. They made this stuff, and then they put it in the temple, and then for years, everything was good until it wasn't, and the kings did evil in the sight of the Lord, right? So what you end up with is a bunch of people. Now, what is fascinating is the Lord had some very specific things going on, right? So, for instance, incense. The Lord had a recipe for incense that was not allowed to be copied by anyone. Straight up, full stop, you can't use this, right? And so they burned that on there in the tabernacle. The sons of Aaron, does everybody remember that story? Nadab and Abihu. They offered what? Unauthorized fire before the Lord. Yeah. And then what happened to them? Yeah, they died right there. It's a pretty staggering story, right? Like they think they're doing right, and in fact they're not doing right, and the holiness of God breaks out against them, and they die. So I tell you all that because I think it's an interesting thing. So God allows the Babylonians to carry away these things, right? These are things that God has very specifically said are to be used this way by these people only and never for anything else. And the Babylonians grab it and take it off to Babylon. But none of them die, right? So an interesting side note. Okay, so back to our story. So we're here in the what historians believe to be the throne room of Babylon. And suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. The king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. Then he said to these wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom." Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. All right. So, what did Daniel know? Well, I'll tell you what. Let me get to that part. So, King Belshazzar became even more terrified. His face grew even more pale. His nobles were baffled. The queen, now that's Nitocris, right? So basically, most scholars believe that is in fact not his queen, his wife, but the queen, his mother, right? So the queen, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came into the banquet hall. "May the king live forever," she said. "Don't be alarmed. Don't look so pale. There's a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners." Okay, what did Daniel know at this point? He wasn't at the party. Okay, well done. He was not here at the party. So Daniel's well into his 80s at this point. But what does he know? Yeah. Okay, he does know that, and that is very true. He is, in fact, going to get an interpretation from God, right? I heard somebody over here. Yeah, he knows that. He does. There's actually some facts that Nebuchadnezzar knows, and instead of playing the game of guess what I'm thinking, I'm going to give you a couple. So he knows that the kingdom of Medo-Persia will overthrow Babylon, right? So he has the prophecies from Isaiah and Jeremiah and knows that this is going to happen. He knows that Babylon is going away. He also knows what? That Babylon is going to reign, is it 70? Yeah, 70 years of servitude. And so he's personally been here for how long? Almost that long, right? So like he knows that the time is upon them. He also knows that Cyrus will initiate the Jews' release from Babylon and the temple reconstruction will begin in Jerusalem, right? And again, this is from the prophecies in Isaiah. And the reason I tell you all this is because the Lord is about to fulfill all the things he's been promising, right? And Daniel, the servant that he loves, is actually going to be how he tells Belshazzar what's about to happen. Okay. And he also knows that the reign of Babylon would end with Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. So Nebuchadnezzar, son, and then grandson, right? So who are we? Belshazzar is his grandson. So he knows. He's walking into the room knowing these things. I'm sure he has no idea how God is going to accomplish this yet, but he does know these things as he walks in. Okay, so the queen told him to go get Daniel. He gets Daniel, who then the king called Belteshazzar. And interestingly, Belshazzar does not use his Babylonian name Belteshazzar, because it's too close to his own name, right? And they're both basically that idea of Marduk's got you. So call for Daniel, and he'll tell you what the writing means. So Daniel's brought before the king, and he says, "Are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father the king brought from Judah?" Anybody want to take a guess, like, why he's being so obtuse here? So he says, "Bring me Daniel." Daniel walks in, he goes, "Are you Daniel?" No, I'm not. They came and grabbed a different guy and told him to come in here and say he was Daniel. I'm like, yes, of course I'm Daniel. The reason I asked this question, one, because I think it's kind of funny, but two, there's an interesting thing going on here. So some commentators believe that the king actually knows about some of these prophecies, right? So the kings know that the Israelites believe that they are going to be overthrown, and that Belshazzar specifically believes that God missed the window. And so he's like, yeah, okay, your God doesn't have as much power as my God. He's already said things were going to happen that didn't happen, so yeah, okay, whatever. And so he's already got in mind this idea, right, that he is going to spend some time saying, my God's tougher than your God. And so that's what he did with the wine goblets, right, or the articles of the temple, right, drinking wine out of them. So he's in essence saying, you guys are not nearly as powerful as you think you are. He's about to be rudely interrupted. So Daniel comes in and says, I've heard the spirit of the gods is in you, and you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. The wise men couldn't explain it, and I've heard you're able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. So if you can read it, you'll be clothed in purple, have a gold chain, and I'll make you the third highest ruler in the country. So what does Daniel say? You can keep your gifts, give your rewards to somebody else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. Now, I think this is sort of an interesting behavior by Daniel. Why do you think he says this? You can keep your gifts. Why do you think he takes that tact?
He would make it clear that he's a servant of God, and he's not doing this for personal gain.
He wants to make it clear that he is a servant of God and not doing this for personal gain. I think that you're spot on. I think that there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and the king believes that in essence you can get what you want if you pay for it, right? And he's like, no, all we got to do is ask. So he's about to give the solution to this difficult problem, right, that no one else can give. I'm going to go Randy and then Becky. Randy, and then Becky. Okay, Randy. Randy raised his hand first, and so I'm trying to reward good behavior. All right.
Rubbing it in, the
Yeah. Yeah, it could be. That's very true. Becky, and for those of you who don't know, that's my wife. That's why I can mess with her. Becky.
So I think part of it too was he's walked in to a king who is defiled
Yeah.
the things of the Lord.
Yeah.
And Daniel's also a righteous man who's probably thinking, I don't want anything to overtake it. He treats the things of the Lord the way he treats it. So I don't care what gold and riches and all these things you can give me. By the way, I've been there, done that with your dad. And I don't want anything that comes from someone who's defiled the Lord.
Yeah. So don't want anything coming from someone who's defiled the Lord. Yeah. Jen. Yeah. Yeah, I think he does. He's got some insight that the rest of those wise men don't have. Not the least of which, of course, is the actual interpretation, and he knows what's about to happen. Right? Okay. So thank you guys. Those were wonderful answers. I think what's about to happen. Right? Daniel answers the king, "Keep your gifts," and then says and now he's going to do some review, right? So this is often what happens with prophets. Your Majesty, the Most High God, gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from the people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like an ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and sets over them anyone he wishes. Okay, so remember what's going on here, right? The king is literally sitting with all of his nobles. So Daniel's just giving him a big old dressing down in front of his entire noble court. He's sitting there with not only his nobles, but his wives and concubines, and they're all drinking from the articles of the temple, right? So they are in the midst of blasphemy. And Daniel gives him this verbal tongue lashing that he well deserves. And reminds him, right? Nebuchadnezzar went sideways because he did not acknowledge God, because he was prideful. And you're going the same way, right? He's telling him, you're going the same way. Now, most scholars believe that based on the age of Belshazzar, of course, that he was probably a teenager when Nebuchadnezzar did his, like, I'm going to live like a wild donkey thing. And so Belshazzar probably was alive and in the capital when all of that happened. And so not only did Nebuchadnezzar struggle to learn the lesson, but his grandson struggles to learn the lesson. And then so Daniel says, but you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew this, and you've set yourself against the Lord of heaven. You've had the goblets from his temple brought to you, you and your nobles, your wives, your concubines drank from them. You praised the gods of silver, of gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which you cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. So, therefore, he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. This is the inscription that was written. I have no idea how to pronounce this. Mine, Tekel Parson. So, what does that mean? Okay, so reading ahead, yes. You are weighed and found wanting, and we're about to give the kingdom to you. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of things. This is interesting. The scholars, of course, are trying to explain, like, why did the wise men have trouble reading this? We don't know why they had trouble, except that God didn't want them to read it, right? And does it really matter why they had all that trouble? Probably not, but I think it's sort of interesting because there's a couple of interesting theories. One, the Jews believe that it was written vertically. Okay, maybe, but I find it a little bit hard to believe that because it was written vertically, people could figure it out. So, all right, that's one thing. Some people believe, we know it's written in Aramaic, and some people believe that Aramaic, all right, so let me get into some technical stuff. So Aramaic is written and there are dots and lines that indicate the spacing between words. So when they write words, there's actually indicators that there is, in fact, this is a word, even though the whole thing runs together. So in ancient Aramaic, it was even crazier because they didn't write the vowels. So some scholars believe that this was one of those times when it was all written together, so it would have been just a string of consonants with no vowels and no indication of which words go with which words, which is sort of an interesting thing and could very well be why the wise men had that. And then some scholars believe that it was, in fact, probably one of these things where the wise men could read the words but could not attribute the meaning to them. That's kind of where I fall. It's kind of one of those things like, if you take the Aramaic words and you translate them, it's kind of, this is what it would say: a pound, an ounce, and quarters. What? Like, what? How am I supposed to tell you what that means? Like, that's crazy. But we're about to get the actual, Daniel's going to tell us what that means, right? Okay, so here's what those words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple, a gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Okay, so this is an interesting thing, right? Daniel already said, I don't want your rewards. And Belshazzar, who just got some seriously bad news, literally, Daniel gave him a tongue lashing and said, you've been pretty prideful, just like your father, your grandfather before you, and then told him that God had said that you've been found on the scales and found wanting. This is not the sort of thing you roll in on a king and say and expect that the king is going to clothe you with purple, throw a thing on you, and actually give you the third highest office in the land, right? So this is an interesting behavior. Daniel goes on to tell us that very night Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Okay, Darius the Mede. I am not going to go into there. It took me most of an afternoon just to read through all of the theories on who Darius the Mede was. According to Daniel, Darius was a Mede, okay? And he was 62. You now know everything that God thought you needed to know. So I am not going to regale you with all of the points of reference for the extra biblical historical accounts for who Darius the Mede might have been. Suffice this to say that there have been theory after theory after theory published on that sort of thing. What I think is important here is not so much that we understand exactly who he was from history, but more so that we understand that God knew what was going to happen. God ordained what was going to happen, and Daniel told them what was going to happen, and we can believe that that's true because it happened just the way Daniel said it would, okay? So, Darius the Mede is actually not Cyrus. Cyrus is the first king of Persia, and most scholars believe that there is an interval between the Medes and the Persians, and then the Persians become the power, okay? So whether he was a governor, whether he was a king in his own right, and then Cyrus took over, nobody knows. Well, a bunch of people think they know. Let me say it that way. A bunch of people think they know, but there's no historical documents to back that up. Now, what I did think was interesting, though, was some things that I will share with you, which was how Cyrus did this. Okay, so Babylon was basically a place that no one thought you could get to, right? Like they thought you could not take this place over. They had stores for over 20 years of food for the city, okay? And they thought that when Cyrus was to arrive, they were fine. They had decades worth of provisions ready, and they were going to be fine. So they were so sure that they were going to be fine that they had this feast, okay? Most historians believe that this was literally a feast for the whole city. So the whole city was celebrating this feast while Cyrus, right, the great devourer, was literally at the walls. Okay, so the arrogance here is off the chain. But interestingly, Belshazzar, there are a couple of spots. Xenophon, we've talked about him before. He was one of the Greek historians. He tells a story about Belshazzar, and there was one of Belshazzar's governors was a man named Gobarias, and his son was hunting with Belshazzar, and basically a bear came out, and Belshazzar missed with his spear, and Gobarias' son killed the bear. And then a lion, they were apparently still in the hunt, and a lion came out, and Belshazzar missed. Gobarias' son didn't, and so said something to the effect of, "Have I not thrown twice in succession and brought an animal down each time?" At which point the king, in a fit of jealousy, busted out a spear and stabbed him through the heart. So Gobarias, as you might imagine, was like, "Hey, you killed my son." And so he was one of the two men that Xenophon says was basically, we would call it a traitor, but a traitor to the Babylonian kingdom, right? And gave it over to Cyrus. So he and this other man, Belshazzar, was with a man named Gadatas, and apparently his concubine found the man attractive, and so he had him castrated, which would be pretty terrible. So he was, by all accounts, a young man, impetuous, and basically cruel. So his own people didn't like him very much. So that's kind of the background, if you will, and the Cyrus and the Persians have arrived at the gate. They're sitting there. They actually use the queen had, in essence, figured out a way to to take the water out of the river that flows into Babylon. Okay, so they dug canals. They drained the water out of the river, made it so that you could ford the river, and then got into the city because the two men, Gobarias and Gadicus, I'm saying that terribly, but nonetheless, the two men allowed them to come in because they called to the men on the gates and said, "Hey, it's us, everything is fine." And so thus they got in and killed Belshazzar. So I tell you that because I think those are sort of interesting stories. This is one of those times when Babylon itself, I should say Persia itself, comes along, and they are trying to say, "Hey, the gods want us to win," all right? And so they arrive to the city, they've killed the king, and all the people, like, they woke up that morning from the feast and they got the Persians arrived. Like, wow, And so the Persians begin a very interesting campaign of rewriting history. So remember that I told you the Nabonidus wanted to get the Sin, the god of the moon, as the chief god. So the Persians arrive and say, "Hey, Marduk is actually chief god. Nabonidus was an idiot. The gods thought so too, and thus they have installed us." Now, his son, interestingly, Belshazzar, didn't subscribe to that, and so he was actually putting Marduk back kind of as chief god. But the Persians couldn't have that, right? Because that wouldn't do. So they, in essence, erased him from history. And so they have all of these places where they declare that Nabonidus was the last king, that he was a terrible king for these reasons, and that he got rid of Marduk, and Marduk put the Persians in charge. So it was kind of an interesting sort of revisionist history kind of affair, and it wasn't until basically last century that we found the documents that support kind of all that, and then found hey, look, the Bible's actually right. Belshazzar was the king, right? He was a co-regent, but he was the king. So Daniel was historically accurate. Okay, so let's talk for a second about the desecration. Why do you think... Actually, we're going to keep going. Okay, so I want to spend some time talking about the Belshazzar appeals to the wise men of Babylon to explain the writing on the wall. Do we do the same sort of thing today? Do we appeal not to God to explain things, but to something else? Do we do that today? Yeah. How do we do that? Ask Google. Okay, that's true. We do. I'm not sure that I think asking Google is a bad thing, though. But I'm specifically thinking about. So we will play the game. You ready? Guess what I'm thinking. Where do we do the same sort of thing today, right? Like, so you've got this thing you don't understand, and so you have asked the wise men of today to explain it to you. The internet. Okay, yeah. I'm thinking more along the lines of like the history of the world. How old is the world? Millions of years, according to scientists, right? And why do they believe that? Because they've done carbon dating. And how many times is the carbon dating wrong? It's based on a set of assumptions that are not biblical, right? And so you end up with this kind of crazy stuff. So that they arrive to tell you that like these things are true, and then science, right? We should believe them. I mean, how many times have we been told that the way the Bible said this has happened, science says, oh, it didn't happen like that. And then we go, oh, yeah, okay. And we believe them. Like, why do we do that? Yeah.
We only look for proof that supports our preconceptions.
Oh, yeah. That's called confirmation bias, right? The fancy name for that. We were always looking for proof that the thing we think is right. The thing we already think is right. Now, the reason I wanted to spend a second to talk about that is because I think that we can get to be like Belshazzar if we're not careful, right? This idea that we already know the answer, that we've got the wise men who can tell us the answer, rather than the Bible, which tells us what to think and how to live, right? And so you end up in this place where you're going the wrong way. Okay, I knew we'd run out of time. All right, I'm gonna read this to you, and I'll leave you with this thought. Okay. So this is from Voices from Babylon, the Records of Daniel, the prophet by Zeiss. When the precious things of God's holy church are seized and appropriated to gild and glorify a party or a sect or to satisfy the narrow whims of some modern Diotrephes, what is it but a desecration of holy things? When baptism, a profession of religion, or the sacred supper of our Lord is used as a passport to citizenship, a qualification for secular office, a means of gratifying friends, securing favors, or gaining credit and standing in society, what is it but a misappropriation of holy vessels to an unholy use? When the Christian pulpit and the honors and sanctities of the holy office are laid hold of for more personal display, the secure of notoriety, the building up of reputation, or the putting forth of doctrines contrary to the gospel, what is it else than a profanation of what is sacred to the Lord? When the facts and expressions of God's word, its pure and glorious truths, its sublime and awful doctrines are taken to point a pun, to edge a jest, to sharpen a sarcasm, to excite a laugh, to raise a sneer, what is it but Belshazzar over again profanely taking hold of the sacred vessels to add zest to an impious carousal? We fault Belshazzar for his profanations, but in these things his sin still lives. So, thank you very much for your attention, and I encourage you to not make